Part 4. The Possibilities. The potential impact of one kingdom labor is incredible. Imagine what could happen if more and more laborers around the world fulfilled their personal role in God's Plan A. Chapter 17. 1 multiplied. Before listening to this chapter, grab a pen and paper and write down the names of 5 people who have made the greatest impact on your life. We'll come back to your list later. In my early days of ministry, I spent 6 weeks at a language school in Honduras. I hoped it would help me learn Spanish more quickly, a skill I would need in the future when ministering in Spanish-speaking countries. For part of my experience, arrangements were made for me to live in a Honduran home where I could practice my conversational Spanish skills with a host family. While living with them, I shared a room containing 2 twin beds along with the 15-year-old son, Eduardo. Speaking Spanish nearly every moment of every day for weeks on end was pretty intense. Fortunately, the slower pace of life than what I knew back in the States gave Eduardo and me plenty of time to hang out, sometimes stretching an introvert like me. Before I arrived, I looked forward to spending lots of time alone, a luxury I rarely experienced back at home. Eduardo, on the other hand, was looking forward to spending lots of time with this new big brother. One of the first mornings, I woke up early to spend some time alone with God. Then I read my Bible and prayed as quietly as possible so I wouldn't wake up my roommate. But Eduardo soon woke up and noticed I wasn't in my bed. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I'm spending time alone with God," I replied, emphasizing the alone part. "Can I join you?" After hesitating for a moment, I felt God prompting me to welcome Eduardo into my quiet time. And later, he prompted me to fully welcome my new younger brother into my life as well. Eduardo joined me that morning and nearly every morning for the next 6 weeks. We read the Bible together, and he asked a lot of questions. We prayed together and talked about many aspects of our spiritual lives. As time passed, it became increasingly clear to me that God had connected our lives for a reason. But he didn't bring us together just so I could impact Eduardo's life. God used Eduardo to impact my life as well. Eduardo's relationship with God grew much deeper that summer, and the trajectory of his life changed forever. And in a way, so did mine. As I lived up close to Eduardo's life and spiritually invested in him, I began to understand and appreciate why Jesus ministered in such a one-on-one relational way. That summer, I assumed God sent me to Honduras to learn Spanish, and spending time with Eduardo was a side benefit. Now I think it was the other way around. Yes, my Spanish improved during my stay, but I think God sent me to Honduras to spend 6 weeks with Eduardo because, ironically, I haven't used my Spanish skills as much as I'd hoped. But Eduardo and I have stayed in contact ever since. I helped him attend a Christian summer youth camp the following year, and I later helped him attend a Christian university in the United States, all the while connecting him with peers who could help him continue growing in his faith. His younger sister, Mimi, later followed him to the U.S. and attended the same Christian university where she grew in her faith and met her husband. Eduardo returned to Honduras after college, and today he disciples young people in the capital city of Tegucigalpa. He hangs out with students in the public schools during lunch, helping them grow stronger in their relationship with Jesus by investing in their lives what others have invested into his. He prays and studies the Bible with them and talks with them about their walk with God, just like I did with him years ago for a short but God-appointed time. A few years ago, I spoke with Eduardo on the phone. At one point in our conversation, he said, "Dwight, I'm doing for others what you did for me, because my spiritual condition would be much different if we hadn't spent those 6 weeks together." In that special moment, I saw more clearly the importance of that time, and I imagined that sometime in the future, one of his kids would say the same thing to him. Spiritual multiplication. While on earth, Jesus gave us a highly relational model for developing and growing people. It included treating his disciples as friends. He ate with his disciples around meal tables. He walked and talked with them on long journeys and camped with them in remote places. He encouraged them, prayed with them, served with them, and ultimately entrusted his eternal cause to them, all in highly relational ways. By today's quick addition standards, Jesus' ministry might be judged a failure. He spent a great deal of time hanging out with a relatively small number of disciples, teaching them through his words, actions, and life. His methods didn't seem very time efficient, and early on his movement didn't sustain much numerical growth. Maybe that's why few people employ Jesus' methods today. But through Jesus, God gave us a different kind of ministry strategy, spiritual multiplication. Given enough time, it makes an enduring and powerful impact. The results of Jesus' model prove that the most powerful form of ministry occurs in a relational context, up close over time. That's what Jesus did, and it's what I did with Eduardo during my time in Honduras. Jesus' ministry model can be summarized in this way: more time with fewer people equals a greater kingdom investment. Now, this idea plays a critical part in Jesus' plan A for reaching the world. He's looking for willing laborers who will invest their time in close relationships with people, organically passing on to them the values of his kingdom. Mass production. Here's the deal, though. As critical as up-close relational ministry is to Jesus' plan A, it runs contrary to today's values and fails to measure up to the logic that society has instilled in us since we were young. It's countercultural. In fact, it's even counterintuitive for most of us. Societal and business plans run on the logic of efficiency and cost-effective mass production. In other words, The goal is to reach or sell or convince the greatest number of people for the least amount of money and time. But God's plan A runs on the logic of one life at a time investments in others, a slower, seemingly inefficient relational process, a process that rarely yields quick, tangible results. I must confess, God's ministry strategy can be a tough sell, even among Christians, because the mass production mindset has woven itself into the fabric of our daily lives. We can't escape it. Today, nearly every product is mass-produced in manufacturing plants. Long gone are the days of artistically handcrafted furniture, hand-stitched and tailor-fit clothing, and homegrown, homemade meals raised or harvested from the family farm. The Industrial Revolution changed all that. As a society, we believe that mass production provides the best and most efficient way to accomplish nearly everything. But as efficient and cost-effective as it may be, it doesn't provide the best model for people-oriented activities like spiritual development. Our spiritual lives cannot be mass-produced, nor can relationships, which leads me to an important observation. Kingdom laborers cannot be mass-produced. Maybe that's why God chose to express His love for the world in the form of a person, His Son, Jesus, the Word who became flesh. And maybe that's why in Jesus' 3 short years of recorded ministry, His most effective ministry occurred in life-on-life encounters and relationships, rather than large venue events. Still, our modern-day mindset for ministry prescribed that speaking to massive crowds and televising programs to as many people as possible are the best ways to reach the world for Christ. And while these approaches, which work on the rules of addition, may reach more people in the short run, they actually reach fewer people in the long run. And they reach them less effectively than relational ministry. Our goal of multiplied Plan A kingdom labors requires an ancient future unearthing of Jesus' ministry strategy. Do the math. Jesus based His relational ministry model on the rules of multiplication. For that reason, some have said Jesus' vision involved spiritual multiplication. Jesus staked the future of the kingdom on passing His values and truths through His personal relationships with some ordinary guys. He told them to do the same. But somewhere along the way, we lost track of His method. A rediscovery of its vast potential requires only a calculator and some simple math. If you spoke to 100,000 people each year for the next 20 years, an overly ambitious goal even for public speakers, you would reach 2 million people. That's simple addition. That also assumes you have no fear of public speaking. But if you regularly invested yourself in the lives of 2 different people each year, a very attainable number, for the next 20 years, and you charged both of them to pour their lives into 2 more people each year who would do the same and so on, you would, together, reach most of the world's population, 3,486,784,400. That's spiritual multiplication, Jesus style. Obviously, the math wouldn't play out quite this perfectly, as some attrition would occur, like Jesus experienced with Judas. Over time, spiritual multiplication is a powerful strategy for reaching the world. In fact, it's the only strategy that could possibly reach a world of more than 6 billion people. Following in Jesus' footsteps, the Apostle Paul charged Timothy to invest his life in and entrust spiritual truths to reliable men who will also be qualified to teach others. 2 Timothy 2:2. An ancient legend tells the story of an emperor of China who loved playing the game of checkers. So he summoned the man who invented the game and asked him to be his guest of honor at a regal banquet with other dignitaries in attendance. At the end of the dinner, the emperor asked the man, "Make any request and I will grant it to you." Burdened for hungry people in India, he decided to take advantage of the exponential power of multiplication and compounding. "If it please you, give me 1 grain of wheat for the first square of my checkerboard, 2 grains for the second square, 4 for the third square, 8 for the fourth square, 16 for the fifth square, and so on until your entire checkerboard has been accounted for." Insulted by such a meager request, the emperor demanded that the man be thrown out of his presence. But the emperor failed to realize that the outrageous request would cover the entire country of India in 1 foot of grain. That's the power of multiplication. And that same power applies when we invest in the life of one person who then invests in the life of another. What seems small at first multiplies exponentially over time. The key to making deep impact. Spiritual multiplication not only reaches more people over time, it impacts lives in deeper ways. In other words, it's a ministry strategy that is both deep and wide. Now, let's apply this to your life. At the beginning of this chapter, I asked you to write down the names of 5 people who made the greatest impact on you. How many of the names on your list are people with whom you've had a close relationship? How many of the names are speakers, authors, or others with whom you've had little or no relationship? When I pose these questions to individuals or groups, more than 80% answer that their greatest influences resulted from meaningful, up-close relationships. That's the power of up-close time and influence. As founding president of a speaking ministry, I witness firsthand the deep impact God makes in people's lives through our speakers. People respond by the tens, hundreds, and thousands, making life-changing decisions. At our Kingdom Building Ministries headquarters, we continually receive calls and letters and emails from people worldwide living out their decisions many years later. But despite the impact of these significant decisions at our events, our speakers and staff believe nothing can replace the power of one life pouring into another over time in the context of a relationship. Nothing. Kingdom labors are produced through life-on-life transfer. Think about it. Jesus preached powerful sermons to the multitudes, but he spent most of his time investing in the lives of a small group of individuals. We see little lasting legacy effect from people who heard Jesus speak, but we see lasting kingdom impact, a movement spawned by a small few who spent up-close relational time with him. When passing on the values and priorities of the kingdom, far more is caught than taught. We raise our biological children this way, and kingdom laborers are best raised this way too. The disciples benefited by seeing Jesus in different kinds of settings, seeing him model his passionate love for God and people in the context of everyday, along-the-way life with all its surprises and complications. And God allows us to see the life of Jesus by giving us access to the historic accounts of Jesus' life in the Gospels. God blessed us with Jesus' teachings, the red-letter words in the Gospels, but he also gave us the stories about Jesus' life, the black letters, for us to also see how he lived. You, too, will make the greatest impact on people who live, work, play, and do life in close proximity to you. God designed it that way, and it's how Jesus modeled it, using all of life as a classroom. Your job description in spiritual multiplication. You may have some concerns about multiplying yourself because you don't want to pass on your shortcomings to others. But spiritual multiplication is not about multiplying yourself. It's about multiplying followers of Jesus. Your job description in multiplying followers of Jesus isn't complicated, and it doesn't require extraordinary gifts. Here it is. Prayer, Acts 1:14. Tons of encouragement, Hebrews 3:13. Humility, Philippians 2:3 and 4. Dedication to memorizing Scripture together, Joshua 1:8. Continually passing everything you can think of that's helped you grow in your walk with God, 2 Timothy 2:2. Meeting on a regular basis, Hebrews 10:24 and 25. Basically, your job description is to come alongside others in their spiritual journey and help them to set and keep their gaze on Jesus, the author and perfecter of their faith. Any follower of Jesus can do that. Some fear that they don't know enough to help other laborers mature in their faith. But you don't need to know all the answers if you know the one who does. So instead of offering pat answers, why not lay down your ego and join them on a journey of praying and seeking answers together? You'll both grow faster and go farther. The testimony of Dawson Trotman, the founder of the Navigators, profoundly impacted my life. He often asked, "Where's your man? Where's your woman?" In other words, who are you helping to explore and discover God's Word and His plan for their lives? Jesus did ministry one life at a time, and He's calling you to do the same. A postscript. Recently, I traveled with some of our Kingdom Building Ministry speakers throughout El Salvador, visiting Compassion International's child development centers and partner churches. We also spent time in the homes of impoverished families, listening to them share how Compassion International had affected their lives. Our home visits had the greatest impact on me, especially my visit with one family. Halfway through the trip, I visited the home of the family whose child we sponsor, Wilbert. Traveling on the bumpy dirt roads to their home, I felt as if I were about to burst with anticipation and excitement. Finally, we arrived at their house where I met Wilbert, his parents, and the rest of his family. For the next unforgettable hour, I began building a relationship with this family and their world. Before leaving, I gave Wilbert and his parents gifts from our family, encouraged them, and prayed with them. And as I left, I pledged that this was just the beginning of a lifelong relationship. The next morning at breakfast in our Salvadoran hotel, I sat next to our Compassion tour guide, Rocio. "How was your experience yesterday when you met your sponsor child?" she asked. "Oh, I'm overwhelmed with excitement," I answered. She smiled warmly and asked, "What was most exciting about it?" Well, this may sound strange, but what excited me most was seeing little Wilbert's life through a visionary lens. Rocio gave me a confused look, so I explained what I meant. As I stood in his home, I could see beyond this season of his life to what God might do in him and through him in the future. I know other people with me yesterday saw a little 6-year-old boy, but I saw a grown man serving God and impacting the lives of others someday. "Wow, that is a different perspective," Rocio responded. "What caused you to see him in that visionary way?" Well, many years ago, when I attended a language school in Honduras, God allowed me to build a relationship with a young Honduran boy whose life has become an amazing testimony of God's power and purpose. Rocio's warm expression quickly changed to shock. She put her hands over her face and started weeping. For a moment, I wasn't sure how to interpret her response. "Oh, my word, you are talking about Eduardo, aren't you?" she exclaimed. Now, I looked shocked. I couldn't believe it. How did she know who I was talking about? Confused and amazed, I asked, "Rocio, how would you possibly know Eduardo?" "He's my cousin," she replied. And then, through swells of tearful emotion, she went on to tell me Eduardo's story from her perspective. "For many years, my mother and I have wondered how Eduardo developed such a mature love for God, and how he's had such a profound spiritual influence on others. We wondered how this could have happened when his own father never had a personal relationship with God." Now, I was on the verge of tears. Dwight, one time I asked him about his passion for God. I wanted to know, how such an ordinary kid had become such an extraordinary servant of God. He told me that God had placed an American man in his life years ago to spark his spiritual passion. Oh, my word. You are that man he was talking about, aren't you? I can't believe it. I can't believe it. I'm in total shock. Well, quite honestly, I was in shock too. Why did God orchestrate such a revelatory, impromptu encounter with Rocio at the same time I was writing this book? Was it to speak to Rocio about how God multiplies our seemingly insignificant life-on-life ministry efforts? Or was it to encourage me to keep on pouring into the lives of other future kingdom laborers like Eduardo? Or was this postscript intended by God to benefit you? Perhaps God allowed this to happen to put an exclamation point on how He wants to multiply your efforts and lead you into giving yourself to others. May I ask, who is your Eduardo?